Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, of course, yesterday overall was quite the day and quite the night overall of professional boxing. Of course, we did have a certain amount of fights that were very particularly interesting. Of course, we had the unification middleweight fight between that Gennady Triple G Golovkin and Ryoto Murata. We also had the very interesting fights, basically the fight that ended up overall pretty much how I predicted between the Erickson Lubin and Sebastian Fundora fight. And then, of course, we had Mr. Ryan Garcia, who, of course, is one of boxing's biggest superstars, at least when it comes to an upcoming prospect. And overall, of course, Mr. Ryan Garcia, for those of you that did not hear the news, overall in his return, he did win by unanimous decision. I believe that the scorecards, I believe that one was 118 to 109, and the other ones, all in all, were, I believe, 119 to 108. I think I scored this fight, I believe, 11 rounds to 1. So the first two scores, all in all, that the judges had, I pretty much agreed with. Of course, his opponent, Emmanuel Tagoe, what I will say is this, or however you pronounce his name, the African fighter from Accra, Ghana, I believe. Basically, he was in survival mode. Excuse me. He pretty much was in survival mode from round one. It was very obvious, in my opinion, that Mr. Tagoe, or whatever his name is, that he was not really willing to exchange with Ryan Garcia. And I don't think overall that he really came to win this fight. I just think all in all that he really appreciated overall that he ended up getting this fight, and I think all in all that he played it way, way, way too safe. And if you're going to win a fight like this, in my opinion, you are going to overall have to risk it. I don't think that there's any problem with fighting on the back foot or fighting a little bit more defensive. And Emmanuel Tagoe, what I will give him credit for is this: he was certainly more slick, overall more maneuverable than what I certainly thought he was going to be. But that's because all in all, I really didn't do any background information on Emmanuel Tagoe. I had completely really forgotten that this fight was going to occur, and I was not really expecting much out of Emmanuel Tagoe. African fighters from the continent of Africa and the countries of Africa, even though they're not always necessarily bad fighters, they're not usually known for the boxing prowess. So I was not really expecting much out of him in this fight. And, the fight pretty much ended up kind of like how I thought it was going to. I thought that Ryan Garcia, more than likely, but of course, without doing any research, I thought more than likely that Ryan Garcia was probably going to stop him. But of course, looking at it now and how defensive that Emmanuel Tagoe is, I'm not really surprised that Ryan Garcia overall went to decision with him. What I will say is this, because of course, there's going to be a certain amount of people that may ask me, well, what do you think about Ryan Garcia's future? Do you think all in all that, he's going to be a champion at the 135-pound division? Do you think that he's going to defeat, the winner of the Devin Haney-George Kambosos fight? What did you think of his performance? What would you rate it out of 10? Or a certain amount of people may ask me. Well, what I'll say is this. I think Ryan Garcia put on a very dominant performance, but at the end of the day, I do think all in all that he could have impressed me more. Now, of course, we know that Ryan Garcia, that he is no longer a part of the Saul Canelo Alvarez gym. He is no longer overall a part of the Eddie Reynoso gym. And I don't think that that's always a problem. A lot of people, of course, always think that they should stick with whatever trainer, all in all, pretty much trains the best fighter. But not everyone, all in all, always trains as well with the same coach. It just is what it is. Andy Ruiz, for example, trained with Eddie Reynoso in his last fight. And to be honest with you, I thought that he looked worse than what he did previously. But that's not me saying that Eddie Reynoso is a bad coach. That's just me saying that not everyone is going to turn into Canelo Alvarez when they work with Eddie Reynoso. So it just is what it is. Ryan Garcia, this was his first fight, I believe, with, very well-renowned trainer Joe Goosen. I've not always been the biggest supporter of Joe Goosen. Sometimes I think that, especially his analysis and his breakdowns, I don't always think are the best. But as a coach, what I will say is this. He seems to overall somewhat know what he's doing as a coach. Maybe I would have to do a little bit more research on him, but of course, Joe Goosen has been around for a very decently long time. And the last fighter that I seen him overall train for a fight, especially in a fight that he was not expected to win, was Chris Arreola against Andrew Ruiz. And Chris Arreola actually put on a much better fight than certainly what I anticipated. So Joe Goosen, is very possible that he could help out Ryan Garcia. And what I will say is this. There was a certain amount of things in this fight to where I thought Ryan Garcia actually did improve upon. I thought that his defense was a little bit better than what it prior was. I thought all in all that his chin was even more tucked down in certain circumstances. So I seen certain improvements from Ryan Garcia, but do I still see some of the same flaws there? Yes, I do. I think that Ryan Garcia, at the end of the day, when he was fighting in this fight, you could tell that he pretty much was trying to do his best version of a Canelo Alvarez impression. He basically was trying to go in there with a high guard, basically counter, throw uppercuts and hooks to the body, maybe get a jab and a right cross here and there. Now, there's a certain amount of people that called Ryan Garcia a one-trick pony in this fight. I don't think that Ryan Garcia is necessarily a one-trick pony because I don't think all in all that he just completely relies on one punch. But what I will say is this: Ryan Garcia really overall does need to work on his jab. I think that that was a big problem for him in this fight. He also needs to work a little bit on that defense and tucking his chin more to his chest. I think all in all that when it comes down to it, I think that Ryan Garcia, that he's gonna have to learn that sometimes in those certain exchanges, you're also gonna have to keep one of your hands up while you throw something, move your head a little bit more. That always has been a problem with Ryan Garcia. He does not necessarily have a great head movement, at least from what I've seen. His feet, to be honest with you, even look like they've gotten a little bit better, but with some of the slight improvements that I've seen with Ryan Garcia, I still see some of those slight faults. So the big question is, will Ryan Garcia be able to win a belt, or will he be a future champion at the 135-pound division, or where is his career trajectory overall going to be? And I think that that's a very interesting question. We're going to see overall where Ryan Garcia goes, but at the end of the day, Ryan Garcia eventually, sooner or later, is going to have to step in there with a real challenge. I think that Ryan Garcia is very physically gifted, and I'm not going to get after him completely too much because he did just recently come off a hand surgery. You know, he overall did just have a year layoff, a little over a year layoff, probably a year and a half. So I'm not going to get too overall, bent out of shape because he went to a decision. Now, excuse me, other fighters, for example, that maybe I would get after when they don't look good in certain fights, maybe it would have been like a Jamal Charlo when he faced overall that one Mexican fighter. But the reason why that was because it pretty much overall was a 9-month layoff. I didn't think that that layoff was long enough overall to look that poor, in my opinion, in that fight. And not only that, but Jamal Charlo, he really has shown a lot of the same faults in his style as what he had even several years ago in that fight. But Ryan Garcia, don't get me wrong, he still is showing some of the same faults. His defense does need to get better. I think all in all, once again, that he overall needs to learn how to keep his hands up and when to keep them up. I did like the high guard some of the times in this fight. But Ryan Garcia, once again, he is going to have to learn how to keep his chin tucked. He is going to overall have to learn how to use the jab. I rarely seen the jab, consistently in this fight and effectively. I think that Ryan Garcia, he needs to learn how to throw the jab and move his head out of the way, sometimes get different angles. And that was another thing that I noticed about Ryan Garcia as well. For those of you that remember Mikey Garcia when he was at his best, what Mikey Garcia overall usually was a master of doing is that sometimes when overall he was not able to get certain shots on the inside, Mikey Garcia would kind of back up, shift to another direction, and get some punches off. Kind of similar to what Vasily Lomachenko did. They work a lot of angles, and I just didn't see that from Ryan Garcia here. I think that Ryan Garcia needs to learn that sometimes if you're just going straight forward at your opponent and you're not getting a lot of those shots on the inside, you need to work angles. And Ryan Garcia, I did not see a lot of that from him here. Who knows? Maybe Ryan Garcia still could be a work in progress. But what I will say is this. If you're asking me the question, do I believe that Ryan Garcia, for example, because everyone seems to be talking about this fight for whatever reason, do I believe that Ryan Garcia would beat that of a Gervonta Tank Davis? I'm not even quite sure if Vasily Lomachenko or some of the other guys that I see overall around those weight divisions would 100% beat Gervonta Tank Davis. I don't personally believe, in my view, that it was his name, Ryan Garcia. I don't personally believe that he would have ever beat Gervonta Tank Davis. I don't think that he would have beat Gervonta Tank Davis a couple years ago. I don't think that he's going to beat him now. It just is what it is, and I know a certain amount of people may disagree. The kid is very physically talented, and he's not the worst skilled boxer that I've seen. But I just think that Gervonta Tank Davis, I just think all around that he is naturally the more skilled and more talented boxer. It just is what it is. Now, Ryan Garcia, is there maybe a way to where he can improve things, to where maybe he can become the number one overall guy in that division? Maybe. But it's going to be very interesting to see where Ryan Garcia goes from here. I think all in all, once again, that his chin, overall, I think that his chin needs to be more tucked. I think all in all that his punching placement and his strategy, when it comes down, it needs to get a little bit better. I think he definitely needs to work on the jab. He needs to work overall establishing distance a little bit better. I think that he needs to work on a lot of things. He's not the most untalented fighter that I've seen. But basically, this fight, what it reminded me of is that he was really trying very hard to beat Canelo Alvarez, but he's not really even 25% of what Canelo Alvarez actually is. Yes, Ryan Garcia, Ryan Garcia is a very talented athlete, but overall, he doesn't have the accuracy. He doesn't overall have the counter-punching ability. He doesn't have the boxing IQ. He doesn't have the head movement. He overall doesn't really have almost anything of what Canelo Alvarez has. Ryan Garcia is very, very talented. He's very strong, and, he's a person that is a great athlete. But I do think all in all that his boxing IQ is going to need to improve. So if you're asking me personally, who would I like to see him fight next? Well, there's a certain amount of fighters maybe that I would like him to fight next. Maybe even someone possibly like a Jose Pedraza. If Jose Pedraza, if that would be an option. And I know a lot of people say, well, he's at 140. Who knows? Maybe Ryan Garcia can go up to 140 for one fight, or maybe Jose Pedraza could come back down. I think that would be an interesting fight. If he is overall just going to stick at 135 and maybe get a fight at 135, maybe face out of a Rolly Romero after overall, Javante Tank Davis more than likely probably puts him in the morgue. It just is what it is. And a certain amount of other fighters maybe that I'm not thinking of. Maybe an Isaac Pitbull Cruz. But Ryan Garcia, at the end of the day, the improvements that I need to see from him, I need to see overall better punching placement. I need to see a better jab. I overall need to see a better body attack when it comes down to it. Sometimes you do need to jab to the body and jab to the head, mix it up a little bit. I think that his punches overall sometimes were a little bit overall, what was the word overall that I was saying? Basically, that his combos were lacking in variety. Sometimes I think, all in all, that he was a little bit too predictable, which is why I think sometimes in this fight it was a little bit hard for him to hit his opponent flush. Not saying, all in all, that he clearly did not win the fight, because he did, but I do think that he could have put on a better performance. Another thing that I believe that he needs to improve on is his defense and his establishment at distance. Sometimes Ryan Garcia, he will go in, and sometimes he won't move his head very well, and he can get countered. I've seen it against Luke Campbell. I've seen it a couple of times in this fight. So we'll see all in all what happens with Mr. Ryan Garcia. But I do think that he is going to have to improve on certain things. Do I believe that he's necessarily going to be at the top of the 135-pound division? I'm not necessarily sure, but I doubt it. We'll see all in all what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. It's going to be very interesting to see where Ryan Garcia goes from here. I do think all in all that he made some minor improvements, but there also is some minor flaws that it could cost him a big fight later on down the line if he overall doesn't get those things sharpened. But we'll see what Mr. Joe Goosen does with him from here. So it'll be very, very interesting. Hopefully we get to see Ryan Garcia maybe in a Jojo Diaz or Isaac Pitbull Cruz fight next, because those fighters, in my opinion, are not necessarily A-grade fighters, but they would be tough fights for Ryan Garcia next. And to be honest with you, there's probably even a certain amount of people that will believe that he may not even get past them. So we'll see all in all what happens. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens later on down the line. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.